safe and clear. This is a simple step that should be followed before working on any AEG or other airsoft gun. Before disassembling any AEG, be sure to remove the magazine, clear or fire the gun in the safe direction. Firing in semi-automatic once or twice should ensure that there are no BBs left inside the AEG. Set the safety to safe before removing the battery. Welcome to mechbox.com's video upgrade series. This video will demonstrate how to disassemble and upgrade the Tokyo Marui version 2 mechbox. We recommend the following basic tools for this disassembly: Phillips and slotted screwdrivers, both large and small, a set of metric Allen wrenches or hex head wrenches, a Torx driver size T10, needle nose and regular or channel lock pliers. For the upgrade, we recommend the following supplies and parts: silicone lubricant, gear grease, thread lock, an upgraded spring, a set of gear shims, and metal bushings. There are several varieties of the version 2 mechbox made by Tokyo Marui, as well as Classic Army and ICS, just to name a few. The basic internal components such as gears, pistons, and springs are very much the same. For this video, I will be disassembling the M733 version as shown here. The M733 and a few other models have a metal plate which protects the electrical wiring. I'm going to remove this wire shield before beginning the mechbox disassembly. Using the Torx T10 bit driver and Phillips screwdriver, remove the screws from the mechbox. Once the screws have been removed, you can split the case apart. One way to reduce the chance of flying parts is to insert a small screwdriver in the back of the spring guide as shown here. In some cases, the mechbox can be difficult to open. However, they are just as likely to pop open unexpectedly, so be careful. Keep working the case open while maintaining sufficient down pressure on the screwdriver to maintain control over the main spring. While holding as many parts in place as possible, release the spring tension and start the process of removing the internal components. Next, remove the small spring attached to the tappet plate as shown here. With the spring released, carefully take out the cylinder, cylinder head, tappet plate, and air nozzle. Now, focus your attention on the gears inside the mechbox. Here's how the gears should look when properly installed. I'll highlight the parts here just for your reference. First, here's the anti-reversal latch or reversal stop latch. The first gear to be removed will be the bevel gear. This gear connects with the motor and the spur gear. Second is the sector gear. The sector gear is what ultimately applies the power to the piston. The last gear to come out of the mechbox will be the spur gear. These standard nylon bushings will be replaced with a set of metal gears. As you remove the gears from the mechbox case, take your time and pay attention to the shims, bushings, and alignment of the gears. Getting familiar with the layout will save you lots of frustration when it comes time to put it all back together. Now, take out the bevel gear. Bevel gears rarely break but can wear prematurely if the motor was misaligned or poorly adjusted. Next, remove the anti-reversal latch. Pay close attention to the orientation of the small spring attached to this latch. Now, take out the sector gear. This gear is the most likely gear to have problems over time. Stripped teeth on the half gear, missing or torn teeth on the gear connecting with the spur gear are just a few things to look out for. Remove the spur gear. This intermediate gear acts as the transmission between the bevel gear and the sector gear. Press out the remaining nylon bushings on both sides of the mechbox case. Now is a good time to clean the inside of the mechbox. Remove any metal shavings, grease, or dirt using a towel or rag. Sometimes the trigger might come loose when opening the mech box. Notice how the spring's attached to the trigger. Watch as I reinstall the trigger into the mech box. Once the mech box is cleaned up, collect your upgrade parts, silicone lubricant, and gear grease. In this video, I'll be installing metal bushings, an upgraded spring, a ball bearing piston head, and a new air nozzle. The first step in putting it all back together is to install the bushings. Once the bushing is in position, use the back of a screwdriver or some other non-metallic device to press the bushing into place. Just make sure the bushings are seated in the mech box correctly. They should be level and fully inserted into the case. Once you have all the bushings in place, I prefer to apply a little gear grease to the bushings before placing the shims and gears. The purpose of shimming the gear is to create the correct gap between the gears as well as the mech box case. If the gears are shimmed too tightly, it could cause premature wear and even break internal components. Shimming too loosely will most likely lead to broken teeth on one or more of the gears. Always keep in mind the relationship between each gear. If you shim one gear higher to take out slack, it could impact the next gear or the overall fit inside the case. One of the best ways to get everything properly shimmed and aligned is to install the gears and test the fitment. After installing the gears, look closely at the spacing and adjust as needed. Don't get carried away with shimming the gears too high. Too many shims and you won't be able to close the mech box case. Now, install the other half of the case and hold it together tightly. Using your fingers, reach inside the case and spin the gears. They should move easily and without much resistance. You can also test the fitment of the bushings. They should not be loose inside the case. Again, take your time to ensure that everything is neither too loose or too tight. Once you've tested and retested the shimming of your gears, the next step is to set the timing of the gears and start the rest of the reassembly. Do your best to keep the shims in place and reinstall the gears, starting with the spur gear. Apply a small amount of gear grease to the spur gear. It's not necessary to apply lots of grease inside the mech box. Too much will only end up making a mess. Now, put the anti-reversal latch in place. Confirm that the spring is working as shown here. While holding the anti-reversal latch back, insert the bevel gear. Spin the bevel gear back until it locks into place with the anti-reversal latch. Now, install the sector gear. Try not to move the other gears or the anti-reversal latch when placing the last gear in. The next objective is to align the sector gear using the tappet plate notch on the gear as a reference point. Lifting and rotating the sector gear as needed, align the notch to the 1 o'clock position relative to the center of the gear as shown in this video. If you remove the stock Tokyo Marui spring and want to replace it with an upgraded spring, you'll first need to remove the spring from the piston. Some guides have suggested cutting the head of the piston to locate the screw underneath. We've been using a different technique for a while. Let me show you. Start by wrapping a towel or rag around the piston head. You'll need just enough cloth to protect the piston head, but not so thick that you're unable to feel what you're doing. Very carefully turn the piston head counterclockwise using a pair of regular pliers or channel lock pliers. The head should come off without too much of a fight. If it does resist, be careful not to squeeze too hard trying to remove it, or you may bend, break, or otherwise ruin the piston head. With the piston head loose, remove it from the piston and pull the spring out. A small metal part will follow the spring. This is what the piston head was attached to. When replacing the original spring with an upgraded spring, simply reinsert the metal part back in the piston, apply a small amount of thread lock to the screw on the piston head, and tighten using the cloth and pliers technique as shown before. Gather your upgrade parts and prepare them to be installed in the mech box. In this video, I've decided to add a new piston head. The ball bearing piston head will allow the spring to pivot inside the piston with less chance of binding. It's definitely not a requirement for a basic upgrade. I'm also replacing the stock air nozzle with an upgraded air nozzle. To swap the nozzles, just pull the original one off the tappet plate and replace it with the new one. Now, I'm going to remove the cylinder head and clean the inside of the cylinder. Simply pull the cylinder head off and use a rag to clean the parts. After cleaning the parts, add a small amount of silicone gel to the cylinder head and put it back in the cylinder. Then apply a thin layer of silicone gel to the inside of the cylinder walls. Continue lubricating the mech box in preparation for final assembly. I prefer to add a small amount of silicone gel to the piston rails and the tappet plate rail. Now that everything is lubricated, assemble the cylinder and tappet plate as shown here. Insert the entire assembly into the case. Slowly roll it into position, taking care not to bump the gears. Add a little silicone gel to the rubber ring on the piston head. Slide the piston into the cylinder as shown here. Using needle nose pliers, reattach the tappet plate spring as shown here. Make sure that the threaded nut is still in the back of the spring guide. Without that nut, the screw holding the buttstock in place will have nothing to attach to. Also, ensure that the washer is still in place. Some upgrade springs have an irregular pitch or varying tightness in the coils. Insert the spring guide rod into the irregular side of the spring. If you haven't already, be sure to grease the other side of the case. Now, with one hand, hold the cylinder and tappet plate in position. Then, with your other hand, carefully compress the spring and spring guide into position. Use caution when compressing the spring. It's not uncommon for your hand to slip, causing the spring guide to shoot across the room during this step. Using your fingers, try to hold the cylinder in place and carefully maneuver the case into position. Align the bushings with the gears and so on. Sometimes the anti-reversal latch or trigger will interfere with getting everything aligned. Once the mech box is all closed up, use a small amount of thread lock on each screw before tightening. Finish tightening all the screws on the mech box. Congratulations, you've completed the version 2 mech box upgrade. Unfortunately, for most version 2 guns, you'll now have to install the mech box into the body before you can test your work. If you have questions or would like more details on how to get into your version 2 mech box, leave comments or send suggestions via our website.